The entry for November 22nd, 1963 started like this. I was Mandarin, the man behind the stockade fence who fired 2 shots. Lebanon was the man in the book depository who fired 2 shots. Saul was the man in the records building who fired 2 shots. Oswald wasn't mentioned by name, but apparently he was the patsy, not one of the shooters. Mandarin's spot behind the stockade fence at the crest of the Grassy Knoll would have been the perfect position for a sniper. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Nell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription with this series. We are starting today with a sort of rabbit trail that I think will take us maybe 2 to 4 episodes to get through. I just want to say a quick thank you to the viewer Susan, who sent me a book that I have been interested in reading and I'm going to enjoy, and then a beautiful packet of sunflower seeds. I am so thankful. I think you must have seen this on maybe my personal wish list, which I didn't even know was public, because I've shared my book wish list on the channel. But I am so grateful. I went out last night. We actually had some rain yesterday, and so I went out last night and just sprinkled these through various parts of my yard near my tomato plant, so hopefully they will attract pollinators. But I am so thankful. Thank you for thinking of this. It's going to brighten my summer. So I just felt so seen, and I feel very grateful. We are going to read through a classic article together, and I don't have the physical magazine. I just have a badly printed front page. This is from Texas Monthly, and it is from December 1990 by a man named Gary Cartwright, and the title is I Was Mandarin. The subtitle is, Did Dallas Policeman Roscoe White pull the trigger on President Kennedy, or is he pulling our leg? So that is who we're going to be talking about today. Roscoe White's story is fascinating and bizarre, and it's one of those stories that people have kept asking me to cover. And I don't know if you haven't been with the channel for a while, I am no expert. I am a person who has been significantly interested and read books throughout the years, but I'm also a mom. And so I have not been able to do a deep dive, but now we live back in Dallas and we have this time on this channel to read through books together. So we have done that, and I am investigating kind of at my leisure. We read through Life magazines. This is one we will be doing soon, probably this week, about LBJ and his entrance into the presidency after the JFK assassination. But we also read books together. Here are some that some of them I have owned, some of them I have just purchased, but that I'm thinking through reading on the channel. So all that to say, this article is one that encapsulates the story of a man named Roscoe White, and we are going to read it together. The article here in the printing starts out this way, because I got it off the internet. It says, this story is from Texas Monthly's archives. We have left the text as it was originally published to maintain a clear historical record. So I just wanted to stop and say they are referencing something that's happening a lot that we need to be mindful of as we research and read, which is there are articles or ideas that are being memory hold. If you have read the book 1984, you know what that means, but essentially this man, Winston, in the book, his job was to take old news articles and update them according to the current thinking. And then what he did was take the original article and put it in a hole where then the original story would be burned up so no one else would have access to it. And so what would happen was their news of, for example, who the enemy was, who they were at war with, would constantly be updated so that there never was a time when we were at war with anybody else. There never was a time when those things were true. And the only place where people had it was in their memory because everything else had been burned up. So Texas Monthly is doing us all a service by saying, hey, we're not updating anything. We're not putting little addendums or adding some parenthetical comments. We are just printing the article as it was. And so that's what we are going to read, because so many books, articles, people reference this article. And I want us to read it through in the original wording. And we will, of course, stop occasionally to ask good questions or think critically about the text, but primarily we're just going to be intaking this article together. This is Gary Cartwright writing in December 1990. I had been in some strange places and listened to some strange stories, but none of them had been as bizarre as this. Neither of us slept very well the night before the assassination, she said, snubbing out one cigarette and lighting another. He kept tossing and turning, and finally I asked him, how could he go through with it? He said, honey, it's like war. The president is a national security threat. If I don't do it, we'll be in nuclear war very soon. But he's got 2 children, I told him, just like you. But he said, honey, matters were taken out of our hands a long time ago. Then he turned over and pretended to be sleeping, and I started to cry. We were seated in the living room of Geneva White Galley's modest home in Odessa, and she was telling me how her late husband, Roscoe Anthony White, killed President John F. Kennedy. The story was shot full of contradictions and wildly implausible coincidences. If this had been a book, I would have thrown it away after page 1. And yet there was something interesting in the way she told the story. Like the heroine of a soap opera, she was able to weave the most intimate details of history into the fabric of everyday life and make it sound, well, not exactly believable, but compelling. Okay, so I just want to say, here we are on page 1, and he has said wildly implausible coincidences, contradictions, that it's a story he would have thrown away, and not believable, but compelling. So that's the way that he is framing the story. And when we have framing like that, we need to think of it, there's 2 different ways we can think of it. One is he's the researcher who is talking to her in real time. And so he is transmitting to us, who is she, how does she come across, and what's happening. And he's saying she's compelling, she tells the story, and it weaves it all together. And it sounds wild. It has contradictions. I don't know what to make of this. Or he is trying to frame it so that we won't believe it. We have to decide what we're going to do with that. But either he's just trying to give us his most true sense of what his perception is of her, or after the fact, because this story is so compelling, he is putting this, front loading it at the beginning to frame our understanding. Either way, that's page 1. I already knew that at least 2 parts of the story were true. So we're going to get those 2. First, Roscoe White was in the same military division as Lee Harvey Oswald, the 1st Marine Air Wing. So were about 7,000 other Marines. Geneva swears that her husband and Oswald were friends, but except for her word, there is no proof they even knew each other. Second, in the fall of 1963, Roscoe White was a Dallas policeman, and Geneva worked for a few weeks as a hostess in Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. So to me, that's actually 3 facts, right? That Lee Harvey Oswald was a Marine in the same division as Roscoe White. Roscoe White was a Dallas policeman at this time, and Geneva did work for Jack Ruby. So he combines those last 2, but to me, those are 3 separate facts that are all going to come into play in this article. Let's keep going. Geneva's story is that she overheard her husband and Ruby plotting to kill the president, and that when Ruby caught her listening outside his office door, he threatened to torture and kill her 2 children, Tony and Ricky. Rock White, as Roscoe was called, suggested an alternative, that she agreed to undergo a series of shock treatments calculated to obliterate her memory. Starting in 1964, Geneva submitted to 4 separate sets of shock therapy. The final treatment was in 1975, 4 years after Rock White was killed in a mysterious explosion. Rock looked like a whipped dog when he went to work that morning, she continued. He didn't touch his breakfast. I was bathing the kids when I heard on the TV that Kennedy had been shot. Then they said that a policeman had been shot, and I thought, oh God, it's Rick. But then he came home around 7, just like always. I put the kids to bed about 9 and made a pot of coffee, and we sat in the kitchen talking for a long time. He said, honey, I never dreamed it would come to this. She stopped, as though that were the end of the episode, and began shuffling around the room, pointing to paintings, woven baskets, and ceramic figures that she had created. They overwhelmed the tiny room. I play the piano too, Geneva told me, or used to when I felt better. The cord of her oxygen breathing tube trailed behind, and from time to time she pressed the nostril piece tight, making little rattling noises as she inhaled. She told me that she was dying and ticked off a list of diseases faster than I could take notes. Diabetes, lupus, emphysema, cancer of the intestine, several others. I shouldn't smoke like I do, she said, reaching for another one. Geneva had shown me photographs of herself when she was in her early 20s, including one in which Jack Ruby is leering as she lifts her miniskirt. She was a real looker 27 years ago. Apparently, her life had been a chapter from hell. So we get this picture of this older woman walking through her small home, near death, with all these memories that have undergone shock treatment, but memories of key players that we all know. So Dallas Policeman in Dallas in 1963 is, whether or not we knew Roscoe White, we have that as this point in our minds of the Dallas PD was there flanking the motorcade. And then we have Jack Ruby. So already we're right in there, and there's photographic evidence. The assassination, I reminded Geneva. You were about to tell me what happened on Saturday. Sunday was Ricky's 3rd birthday, she said, picking up the storyline. So on Saturday, I baked a coconut cake and got the party favors ready. That night, Ruby came over for supper. We sent the kids outside to play with Ruby's dog. What was her name? Sheba or something like that? Rock cooked steaks on the grill, and I made baked potatoes and a salad and strawberry shortcake. That was Rock's favorite. After dinner, I was washing the dishes, and I heard them talking in the living room. Ruby was bragging about killing Kennedy, flying high like he was drunk, only he wasn't drinking. He talked about killing Oswald the next day and said he wasn't going to be any problem because he'd get a signal when they were ready to move him. He said something about the magic bullet, how one of them had left the magic bullet at Parkland. So I sometimes take notes in the margins when I'm reading, especially on a copy like this. If it's on an old document, I use post-it notes. But I just wrote, this seems revisionist. Some of this seems entirely potentially truthful. There's a way in which, and he even talked about it on page 1, where if somebody is interweaving facts that you wish to know about among very plain things, that does start to resemble truth. That's how we tell a story. Like, well, that weekend was the time when Aunt so-and-so came into town, and your real life is mixed in with the facts, and they are inseparable because they happened together. But then there's things like this, where she's saying, they're talking about Oswald and something about a magic bullet. But to me, the mention of the magic bullet, before I got to the next paragraph, I wrote, this seems revisionist about Oswald the next day. And then I wrote, also revisionist about the magic bullet. So here's what he says. He used that term, magic bullet, I interrupted. The phrase wasn't even coined until after the Warren Commission report declared that the bullet found on a stretcher at Parkland Hospital was the same bullet that passed through the bodies of both Kennedy and John Connally. A truly remarkable conclusion, because the bullet would have had to travel through 7 layers of skin, shatter one of John Connally's ribs, shatter a bone in Connally's wrist, and emerge in nearly pristine condition. Magic was the only word to describe such a bullet. I'll point out our readings of Dr. Crenshaw's book here on this channel indicated that he observed 5 bullet fragments being removed from Kennedy's wrist, and that there was a large fragment of a bullet left in the thigh because it would have done more damage to remove it, and it was causing no problems where it was. So the magic bullet, if you've seen it, just has grooves from being shot. It shows no damage, no missing pieces whatsoever. So even his incredulity at the magic bullet doesn't actually rise to the level that we should have, which is not just it went through 7 layers of skin, shattered the ribs, shattered a bone, emerged pristine, but also it somehow left fragments behind without any evidence of missing a single piece. So truly a magic bullet. Are you sure they said magic bullet? I asked Geneva again. I'm positive. Mama, that can't be right, her son Ricky interrupted. In the 4.5 years since he had read his father's amazing confession in an old journal he had found in a footlocker, Ricky White had become familiar with the details of the assassination. I get confused, Geneva admitted. It's been a long time. I just want to say this could be an old woman revising her story with now known details. Sometimes we do that. Like there was this situation we went through where my husband had something that we didn't know what it was. And later, like 6 years later, we found out the fairly mild medical condition that explained that thing that happened. But for 6 years, we lived without it. But now I say that's because of his such and such, right? So I think we do that. And this is an old woman near death doing this, but it does, raise credibility issues for sure. Roscoe White's journal, which he just referred to as having been found by his son, Ricky, is no longer available for our inspection. Ricky says the FBI took it, but let's accept it on faith for the moment. The journal was an interesting mix of the familiar, the convenient, and the ludicrous. It must have read like a C-grade movie script, and yet it was a scenario that nearly every critic of the Warren Commission wanted to believe. As Ricky recalls, the entry for November 22nd, 1963 started like this. I was Mandarin, the man behind the stockade fence who fired 2 shots. Lebanon was the man in the book depository who fired 2 shots. Saul was the man in the records building who fired 2 shots. Oswald wasn't mentioned by name, but apparently he was the patsy, not one of the shooters. Mandarin's spot behind the stockade fence at the crest of the Grassy Knoll would have been the perfect position for a sniper. I just want to say 2 things about the particular location they are talking about. One is that Robert Groden talked about the exact location of this shooter, that whether or not we believe it's Roscoe White, he says there was a man 8 feet behind the corner, behind the stockade fence. And in an interview that I watched, he identified how he knows that exact spot. It's because of the sound studies, the audio studies that were done of Dealey Plaza as a response to the finding of the dicta belt. If you remember, there was a police officer who was riding through the motorcade that accidentally or intentionally, we don't know, jammed his on button on his walkie-talkie or his two-way radio thing that they had for the police officers. And what that did was jam up that entire channel during the entirety of the assassination, but also it made a recording that's on a black dictabelt roll that then was discovered many years later. And they were able to take out the loud sound of the motorcycle and isolate exact points where there were shots. And the number of shots is between 6 and I believe the upper level is something like 14. And some of those they chose to rule out, but they kept those 6. And interestingly, that matches precisely with the number that's being put out here in this article. So that's one thing about the location, is that actually researchers based on audio sounds have identified that as the only place. They took a bunch of different positions throughout Dealey Plaza to see what a frontal shot would sound like, and the only place that got the exact same reading was 8 feet behind the corner point of the stockade fence. But The other thing that I just wanted to say is that when I was going through and reading all the historical signs, this is the point at which the location of Dallas's first settlers store, so first merchant store, was chosen because it is one of the highest points in Dallas. It's visible from all around. And so the original settlers store in Dallas was there at this exact crest of the Grassy Knoll. So I just find that really fascinating. I love history, and I thought it was interesting that this really is a high point for not just Dealey Plaza, but for Dallas, and that it was visible from all sides. So people coming into Dallas early on in Texas history could find the store. So that's that. Mandarin's spot behind the stockade fence at the crest of the Grassy Knoll would have been the perfect position for a sniper. From that vantage point, a marksman could have picked off the president with a pistol. Though the Warren Commission maintained that no shots came from the Grassy Knoll, dozens of eyewitnesses thought otherwise. So did Sheriff Bill Decker, and so did a number of Dallas policemen who rushed up the hill immediately after the shots were fired. Almost all of the doctors who worked on the president and Parkland thought the head wound indicated a shot from the front. There is a documentary that shows the news footage of the docs. It's called Evidence of Revision. There is also, I think it's called The Doctors, what is it called? The Doctors Talked? There's one that's just focused on the doctors. And there are other great documentaries too. But yes, Crenshaw, others believed that this was an entry wound, and many of them also believed there was an entry wound somewhere around here that then blew out the back of the head. It is anomalies like these that keep the mystery of the assassination alive and have brought the otherwise unremarkable American Gothic family of Roscoe and Geneva White into the public light. The next section is subtitled A Lean-Mouthed Marine. Who was Roscoe White, and what was there about his life that made anyone suspect he was an assassin in the employ of some renegade intelligence organization? For one thing, he fit the profile. He grew up on a farm outside the small town of Foreman, Arkansas, a model boy who loved football, God, and country, who did what he was told and didn't ask questions. The speech that Roscoe White made to his graduation class at Foreman High School, warning of the international communist conspiracy and advocating for a strong national defense, was a remarkable declaration of patriotic fervor, touching in its innocence, but unquestionably sincere. This was a young man waiting to be molded, prepared to make any sacrifice in the cause of the Cold War. After graduation, Rock worked in his grandfather's sawmill in East Texas. He was lean-mouthed, recalled Kenny Slagle, who worked with him. He didn't say much about his personal life, but he was a worker. We worked on Saturday without any kind of supervision, stacking lumber until it was stacked right. At 21, Rock married Geneva Toland, who was just 15. Wow! We have talked about, old patterns of marrying young, but wowzers, 21 and 15. A year later, he joined the Marines. In August 1957, he sailed aboard the USS, I think people say Bexar, but in Texas we say Bayer. Bexar, from San Diego to Yokosuka, Japan. One of his shipmates was Lee Harvey Oswald. For the next 5.5 months, White and Oswald were assigned to the 1st Marine Air Wing, first at Atsugi, Japan, and later at Subic Bay in the Philippines. Oswald was a radar operator in Marine Air Group 16. The two groups may have been quartered miles apart, but Oswald and White probably drank at the same enlisted men's club. Being Texans, a long way from home, there's a good chance the two met. Atsugi, incidentally, was one of the bases from which the CIA operated its ultra-secret U-2 reconnaissance flights. So that's really interesting. I think we're going to get a little bit more into the potential for U.S. intelligence to touch at this point in their stories. But my son happens to be a Marine, and what they're saying is absolutely true, that people do connect. They're like, oh, you two are from Texas, or hey, he has a sister that same age, or whatever. They do that all the time. And I got to go visit my son, and he made those kinds of connections. Like, they're the only two from Nebraska in our whole company or whatever. And so I think this could totally be true. There's not evidence, to my knowledge, of any photographic evidence where they're in the same, little buddy group or whatever, but it is entirely possible that they knew each other. They were on the same ship, which is tight quarters, but with, I believe, thousands of men aboard, but then being quartered miles apart on the same air bases multiple times. It does seem they would have crossed paths and noticed each other, and people might have made connections. In 1959, White re-enlisted for 6 years, but inexplicably changed his mind in 1962 and applied for a hardship discharge. In the meantime, Oswald had also received a hardship discharge. He had defected to Russia for 31 months and then was allowed to return to the United States without so much as a debriefing by U.S. intelligence. Oswald's odyssey stretched credulity beyond all reason. Many of his Marine buddies just assumed that Oswald was an American intelligence agent. Early in 1963, Roscoe White moved his family to the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, where Lee Harvey Oswald was also living. So, their stories touched back here. They were both at Atsugi Base in Japan, which is where the U-2 reconnaissance flight trainings and all of that happened. At some point, Oswald underwent some language training, and he goes and defects. And his Marine buddies just think, well, if he gets back into America without any tribunals, without any intelligence follow-ups, without any problems, he probably was intelligence, which I think is good reasoning. To me, that reasoning tracks. And here is Roscoe White's path, where he's Marine, and all of a sudden, he receives a hardship discharge, and they both end up in Oak Cliff, Dallas, in 1963. Interesting. Geneva White remembers her husband's talking about a friend from the Marine Corps named Lee, particularly a story of how Lee got drunk one night and kept falling down a flight of stairs. Among the memorabilia that Rock brought home after his discharge was a photograph of a group of Marines waiting to board a ship in the Philippines. Oswald is clearly identifiable in the foreground, and Geneva says that the Marine in the background, whose face is shaded by the bill of his cap, is her husband. That same photograph, cropped differently, was published in Life magazine 3 months after the assassination. Another souvenir was a .22 caliber 2-shot Derringer. Geneva remembers that Rock told her, "Keep this in a safe place. It'll be worth a lot of money someday." The Derringer is similar to the one that fell out of Oswald's barracks locker in 1958, wounding him in the arm. I don't know this story, and I didn't go and dig before reading this to you all. If you know the story or you know where it's told, please let me know in the comments. But it sounds like a Derringer fell out. It says it fell out of Oswald's barracks locker in 1958, wounding him in the arm. So did it fall out and fire and wounded him? I don't think it would just fall on him. So it had to be that it discharged. If so, and if it was, this will be worth a lot of money someday, then that's interesting. Maybe that's the same weapon. Geneva recalls being introduced to Lee Oswald a few months before the assassination at a rifle range near the Grand Prairie Naval Air Station, where White and Oswald were practicing marksmanship. So Grand Prairie is not far from Oak Cliff. I mean, we're talking a 10-15 minute drive at best. A few weeks later, she saw Oswald in a grocery store near their home in Oak Cliff. "I saw your friend Lee today," she told Rock, who became irritated and told her to never mention that name again. About the same time, Geneva caught her husband in bed with a woman named Hazel, an act of infidelity that severely strained their marriage. Rock promised that the affair was over, Geneva recalled, but when she happened to overhear Jack Ruby mention Hazel's name one night at the carousel, she stopped outside the door of his office and eavesdropped. She heard Ruby tell her husband, Hazel is the contact. Ruby said something about the Bay of Pigs and how Kennedy had betrayed them. The longer she listened, Geneva said, the clearer it became that her husband and Ruby were talking about killing the president. This, at least, is the memory of a dying woman with a history of shock treatments. Policemen who worked with Roscoe White find the mere suggestion that he was involved in the assassination ludicrous. Let me put it this way, said W.L. Barnard, now retired from the Dallas PD. Roscoe was 100% jarhead Marine, just like me, trained to follow orders. Now, do you suppose a man like that would kill the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America? John T. Williams, another former Dallas policeman, said, the whole story is unbelievable. Rock never told anyone that he was personally acquainted with Oswald or knew anything about the assassination. I mean, like somebody's going to go around saying, hey, I'm buddies with Lee Harvey Oswald and also there's a plan afoot. Nobody's going to do that. So I don't think some random other policeman saying, he never said anything about this. He never told me. He never told anyone. That doesn't prove anything. The first quote, okay, that's actually good logic of he's a jarhead Marine, which means he is patriotic. He is trained to, honor the Commander-in-Chief, not kill him. Do you really think he would do that? That's a good question that you would have to process through of would Roscoe White participate in this? But the second quote doesn't mean a hill of beans to me. White quit the police force in October 1965, 2 years to the day after he signed on, telling fellow officers he was quitting because of financial and marital problems. So this is interesting. 2 years to the day means that October of 1963 was when he came onto the force. So that is a 6 weeks prior to the assassination entering of the Dallas PD. In the 6 years that followed, Roscoe White made a number of unexplained trips to New Orleans and other places. I was never sure what was happening, Geneva said, but I was raised to let the man do the thinking and not ask questions. I mean, also, she's much younger than him. She's a good 6 years younger than him. So, yeah, she was like that. And also there was a differential in their relationship that probably made her defer to him. In 1968, White moved his family to Mountain Home, Arkansas. It's the middle of nowhere. That's the deep woods of Arkansas. Supposedly to work for the post office, but nobody at the Mountain Home post office remembers him, and postal employment records don't go back that far. Later that same year, the family returned to Dallas, and White became the assistant manager of a 5-and-dime store in Richardson. Their family appeared to have money, recalled the Reverend Jack Shaw, who was their pastor at Central Park Baptist Church. New car, new home. As I recall, Roscoe pledged $10,000 to our building program. My goodness, that was a lot of money back then. White's sons, Ricky and Tony, had new bicycles and go-karts, and the family purchased a cabin on a lake in Central Texas. Rock continued to mess around with other women, and Jack Shaw counseled the couple and prayed with them on several occasions. Rock poured out his heart to me, Shaw said. He told me he had sinned against God, his country, and especially against his wife. He told me he had taken human life on foreign soil and here at home. I knew he had been in the service and had been a policeman, and I didn't press him for details. I will say, Reverend Jack Shaw is going to become a key witness in all of this story. At this point, he has no reason to lie or contrive this. This is someone who is an outside person who is just observing. They came in, they appeared to have money. Now let's put this in context. Somebody who has moved from a big city to a small town in Arkansas. Poverty at this point in Arkansas. Arkansas is a beautiful state, but at this point particularly, and even still, it is economically quite a bit under where a Dallas suburb living would put you. And so they go out to the middle of nowhere, have a job maybe at the post office, not making much money. That's not even proven, but nobody remembers a job. And then shortly after move back to Dallas and appear to have money. They pledge a big amount of money to their church. They have bicycles, go-karts, and a cabin in Central Texas. So this is not someone struggling for money. And then he's saying, after this man has passed, and because of the details of this, he poured his heart out to me, and he confessed these things. In the summer of 1971, shortly after Geneva returned from a trip to New Orleans, she suffered an emotional breakdown and was hospitalized for about a month. Jack Shaw was surprised that the family hadn't sought his spiritual guidance, but sensed that there was some reason for their reluctance. Years later, he learned that on the trip to New Orleans, a strange and sinister man had approached Geneva in a nightclub, reminded her about Rock's part in the Kennedy assassination, and told her, "We have another job for Rock. Tell him he has 48 hours to get in touch." Apparently, White never got in touch with that man. By this time, White had a better paying job at M&M Equipment Company, but in September he was fatally burned when a leak in an acetylene torch flamed up, causing a can of chemicals that was stored under his workbench to explode. On his deathbed, White told Jack Shaw that the explosion was no accident. Shaw assumed there would be a criminal investigation, but there wasn't. White's family eventually reached an out-of-court settlement with the chemical manufacturer for $57,000. The comment that was given by Roscoe was that he had gone on a break, and that during his break, someone had come to his station and fiddled with it, opened up the can of explosive gas. And so when he went to use his torch, then the can exploded immediately. He lived for almost 24 hours, I believe, after this explosion. And so he was able to communicate what had happened amazingly. So that is why we get this, explanation of what he had experienced. And yet he was fatally burned because he passed very fast on his deathbed 24 hours later. Not long after that, Geneva and her two sons moved back to her parents' home in Paris. And I want to point out Paris, Texas. Yes, there is an Italy, Texas, but we call it Italy. And there is a Paris, Texas up north of Dallas, where she remarried. Jack Shaw didn't see or hear from her again for nearly 20 years. So that is what we are going to read today. Come back next time. I think we're going to probably, seeing the rate that we're going through, I think we have 2 more readings that we'll do on this. So come back for the rest of Roscoe White's story. But let me know in the comments. To me, the story seems largely credible to this point. What about you? I would love to hear. Let me know what you know about Roscoe White, what questions you have, and what you think of this article so far. I hope you have a great day. Bye.